So thank you for that, Janet. It's wonderful to be able to speak to you this morning, carrying on our series, looking at some of the adventures of Paul through the book of Acts. Looking today at Paul's adventures in Athens. So far we've heard about Paul and Barnabas and Paul's kind of first missionary journey as they go to churches in and around Antioch. Last week we heard from Anne about the Council of Jerusalem, where the followers and the disciples agreed that the Holy Spirit was leading them to encourage all people, not just Jews, to become followers of the way and not to let anything stand in the way of that. And this week we see Paul in Athens, and we see some of his finest evangelism as he tells some of the world's greatest academics about the good news of Jesus Christ. So this all took place after a bit of a torrid time for Paul. He and Silas and Timothy have been witnessing in various cities around the kind of Mediterranean, and they've been imprisoned, they've been beaten, they've been rushed from place to place to escape being imprisoned and beaten, and now Paul ends up in Athens, and he's all on his own. His friends have been left behind as he's been kind of whisked away to avoid an angry mob, and he finds himself in this city, which he may have always wanted to visit, but certainly wasn't there on their itinerary of places we need to plant the church. It wasn't a place that he wanted to go and sightsee, although many of the places that we want to go and sightsee would still have been there and have been far more beautiful than they are today. But Paul doesn't get distracted by any of that. He takes full advantage instead of this opportunity that God has presented him. And that gives us an insight into Paul's desire and passion to take any opportunity that he can to tell people about Jesus being the Messiah and the Son of God. Now, he goes on a bit of a journey to get there. Just in this reading, he starts out quite discouraged. He becomes quite daring in what he says and who he says it to, and finally he urges people to make a decision. And it's this journey from discouragement through to daring, through to decision making that we're going to be looking at today. So that's what we're going to be looking at, and hopefully that's going to help us to understand in this week of Love Hewitt, if we get an opportunity to talk to people about our faith, hopefully we can take some of the lessons from this reading out into our lives ahead as well. So first of all, we see Paul discouraged. We see him in Athens, and as I've said, he's already had a pretty rough time. He's been in prison, he's been beaten, and now he's separated from his friends in a city that he's almost certainly never been to before. So he goes for a bit of a wander. And in some ways, you could describe Athens as being a little bit like York. Obviously, I'm not talking about the weather or the amazing food or the cheap cost of living. So actually, York is nothing like Athens. But York is like Athens in one way, and that's in the way that if you're in the city centre, almost anywhere you look, you will see a place of worship. I think it's hilarious if you go to the Minster and you turn around and the belfry is behind you, and then you turn around again and there's a Catholic church just there, and then you walk around the corner towards Marks and Spencer's and there's another church, and then you walk down to the Shambles, it's another church. You think, I want to go to the park, I've had enough of all these churches. There's another one right on the edge of the park. They're everywhere. It's incredible. So Athens was a bit like that. Everywhere you turn, there was a different place of worship, a different idol, a different altar to go to. But unlike York, these were all to different gods, different religions. They weren't all kind of part of the same faith. There would have been old Greek gods like Zeus and Athena, some of the Roman kind of appropriations of the Greek gods like Jupiter and Minerva, and even some Egyptian ones like Osiris and Isis, as well as loads of other local ones that people will have worshipped as well. And along with all of these different gods and demigods went a whole lot of idol worship. And often, along with idol worship, went sexual exploitation and abuse of lots of different kinds. And Paul has seen that when people worshipped these false gods, their bodies didn't become this thing that was made in the image of God. They become playthings, they became toys, they became devalued and less than they should be. And that's not something that a devout Jew or a committed Christian, for that matter, would be very pleased to see. And so having witnessed all these kinds of things going on in the city, Paul pulls out his go-to move and he heads to the local the synagogue to talk to the local Jewish believers about the Messiah. He had come to earth in the form of Jesus Christ, had died, come back to life, been resurrected, and now sat at the right hand of God. And usually he'd go there and he might have to contend with some of the local priests, Pharisees, when they kind of challenged him on theological things. But in Athens, it's a little bit different. He finds himself confronted not by priests and other Jewish believers, but by philosophers, some of the best minds in the whole known world at that point. Some people who were literally professional thinkers. And it reminds me of when Emma and I used to be at St. Edward the Confessor Church over in drink houses, and after the services there, me and another adult would take some of the kids round into the vicarage garden to play football. And these were all quite small children, so me being a 6'4" giant, I looked like Ronaldo and Messi and Harry Kane rolled into one. I was bigger, faster, stronger than all of them, and it was incredible. And they all thought I was the best football player they'd ever seen in their entire lives. And then after we were there for a while, I went off to train down in Cambridge, and there was a football team at Ridley as well, where I trained to be a vicar. I joined the football team, and I remembered, actually, I'm a giant, uncoordinated, unathletic goalkeeper, not Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, Harry Kane roll into one. And I think Paul might have felt a little bit like that. He was used to running circles around people that asked him questions. He knew the answer to all of those kind of questions about the law and about Jewish faith. When philosophers come at him, it's a little bit of a different proposition. And actually, he ends up being laughed at and being belittled. They call him a babbler, or another translation puts it as a word scatterer. It was a description that was full of contempt, rather than precise, considered thesis. They were accusing Paul of being someone who picks up ideas from all over the place, someone who scatters words, or who's like a magpie, picking up shiny objects and dropping them as soon as they lose their interest. This wasn't a real school of thought, they said. This was a flash in the pan. This wasn't anything to really be interested in. This was something that caught their attention of lesser minds, not something for real intellectuals to bother thinking about. And so we can see that Paul has every reason to feel discouraged. There's so much around him in Athens itself which draws people away from God, so much to distract them and make it difficult to live a life centered on worshipping and serving Jesus. And when he does speak about his faith, he's belittled and he's mocked. And I don't think it's hard to see similarities between Paul's experience in Athens and our experience in the modern world. There's so very much to distract us from the Christian faith. So many other things for people to give their time and their energy and their passions to, much of which can be deeply unhealthy and really damaging for us as human beings. And more when we speak about our faith openly, we can feel that we're opening ourselves up to being mocked and ridiculed, like people are going to take a jab at us. And so often we do give in to that discouragement. We allow it to stop us from sharing our faith, sharing the wonder and transformation that following Jesus can bring. But if we read on, we can see how Paul moves on from a place of discouragement to a place of daring. How he took on and rose to the challenge, trusting in God to give him the right words at the right time. And so after these discouragements that we've talked about in verse 19, these intellectuals, these professional thinkers invite Paul to share his thoughts with them on the grandest stage, the Areopagus. This is where the philosophers would meet to talk about their high-minded ideals, to battle it out. A battle of the wits would take place between them. Now, without the benefit of being there or being fluent in classical Greek, we can't know exactly in what way Paul was invited to speak at this most prestigious of places. But most commentators agree it probably wasn't a friendly invite or out of genuine curiosity that this invite happened. Rather, there was a bit of a veiled threat and a real risk to Paul. It wasn't a matter of, oh, he's an interesting fellow with interesting ideas, let's invite him along and see what he says. Instead, the invite contained a veiled threat. Firstly, they say that Paul seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, which, in some senses, to the Athenians, was true. The Athenians may have kind of got their heads around the idea that these Jewish believers had a strange belief in just one God. Here was a member who knew adventurous sect of this odd religion. Now you might think, in a city that was literally full of different gods, why would the Athenians find another sect of a different religion? Someone preaching about something else. But apparently it was possible in Athens to have too much of a good thing. Even the great philosopher Socrates had been accused and charged with preaching foreign divinities over 400 years before Paul had arrived in the city. The problem wasn't necessarily the new ideas, but the openness, or more accurately, the possible secretness of these sects. And the question then in verse 19, maybe we know more about this new teaching that you're presenting, becomes a bit less polite and a bit more threatening. Are you keeping secrets from us? Are you hiding things that only your own sect gets to know about? Is this dangerous to us and to our city? And so Paul is given the chance of a lifetime to tell his good news to the brightest and best thinkers in the world. But he knows if he takes a misstep, it could be the end of his ministry and quite possibly the end of his life as well. So Paul must have been terrified. He must have been. These people had the ability potentially to intellectually eviscerate him. They could have ripped him apart. He says himself in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 that he is an unskilled speaker in comparison to others. So coming up against the philosophers of Athens, especially when he knew what the stakes were, certainly would have had me trembling. I'm sure it did for Paul as well. But Paul also knew he was doing God's work. And that ultimately, if God wanted him to win these philosophers and intellectuals over, then he would give him what he needed just at the right time. Many of you will have heard of Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy. They were middle-aged Christian women in Holland when World War II broke out. Eventually, they were arrested and taken to Ravensbrück concentration camp for rescuing and hiding Jewish people. And Betsy died in Ravensbrück, but Corrie miraculously survived and went on to tell thousands, if not possibly millions of people about God's forgiveness and God's miraculous power to save and heal and forgive. And when asked by someone how to prepare for persecution, she used to tell this story about her childhood. She said, when I was a little girl, I went to my father and said, Daddy, I'm afraid that I'll never be strong enough to be a martyr for Jesus Christ. Tell me, said her father, when you take a train trip to Amsterdam, when do I give you the money for the ticket? 3 weeks before? One day. You give me the money for the ticket just before we get on the train. That's right, the father said. And so it is with God's strength. Our Father in heaven knows when you will need the strength to be a martyr for Jesus Christ. He will supply you all that you need just in time. Paul knew this truth as well. He knew that he might not be the most gifted speaker in the world. I mean, spoiler alert if you've not read ahead. Paul literally kills someone out of boredom in a couple of chapters' time. He's preaching for so long, so far into the night, that someone literally falls out of a window because they fall asleep and die. He has to go out, pray for them, resurrect them, and then he goes back in and carries on preaching. He doesn't learn from his lesson. He carries on until the morning. It's unbelievable. And also one of the best encouragements for preachers I've ever seen. Paul, of all people, killed someone with a terrible sermon. So Paul knows he's not the most gifted of speakers. But he knows that God will give him what he needs to help other people to engage with and understand his faith, what he believes. So Paul brilliantly begins his talk by drawing on something from the local context, this altar to an unknown God, pointing out quite fearlessly that the Athenians are basically clueless. They don't even know what they're worshipping. They have no idea what is around them and what is true. He goes on to declare that the God who he worships doesn't need all of these temples and these altars. He doesn't need sacrifices and heroic deeds. God made the whole earth. He made everything in it and on it. And he goes on to say that all people are God's children. Again, this would have been a really novel idea for pagan religions. In classical Greek culture, the children of the gods were other gods, or they were demigods like Perkins or Jason. Normal people were just the playthings of the gods. So to hear that we are God's offspring would have been a huge culture shock. And again, this isn't something that Paul shies away from. He knows that they need to hear this truth, so he goes for it. He's daring illustrating that far from being the plaything of the gods or inconsequential to them, that actually God loves us. And that love is why he can't just let us stay where we are in the mess that we're in. And so he sent Jesus, his son, to help us out of that mess. And one day, he says, Jesus will return, and all the wrongs of the world will be righted. For that to happen, the world will have to be judged. And all of this is proved by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I think we're often quite happy with the kind of God wants a better life for you message. The John 10:10, God came that you might have life and live it to the full. That's the really nice bit of Christianity. But what we often struggle with is the idea of judgment and justice. But that too comes out of love. I spent the day with my nephews on Friday, and they are wonderful. But my sister doesn't let my nephews get away with it. When one of them picks up a toy train and bashes the other one on the head, that twin goes on the naughty step, and they have a time out, and they might lose some of their tablet time. They have to know there are consequences to their actions, and actually, ultimately, that will help them have a much better life further on, because they won't be an adult bashing someone on the head, because they'll have learned early on, I know that there are consequences to my actions. So if you're not someone who thinks of yourself as a natural evangelist, then it's often nerve-wracking to talk to others about our faith and about especially those difficult topics to do with our faith. But the encouragement from this passage is to be bold, be daring, and trust that God will give you the right words at the right time, remembering that ultimately this good news that we have is worth sharing with everyone. So Paul begins by being discouraged and becomes daring, and finally he encourages his listeners to make a decision. As we look back at the second half of Paul's speech, he insists that he and his hearers are living in a new moment in the history of the world. A moment in which the times of ignorance, the times when people could hardly be expected to really know who God was, were being brought to an end. And so in verse 30, Paul tells them what to do. He says, repent, turn away from the old way of doing things, the ways that led to immorality, to exploitation, to abuse, and instead ask for God's forgiveness and put your trust in his Son. Life is full of decisive moments. At the age of 15, after watching almost a full episode of CSI, I decided I was going to be a crime scene investigator. And I filled out my options form and handed it into school and chose biology and chemistry as two of my A-level choices. Turns out I was really, really bad at biology, and somehow even worse at chemistry. Not a good choice for me. Fortunately, that only impacted the next 2 years of my life, and not my whole life going forward. It was so bad, I remember a teacher coming up to me who hadn't taught me after I took my AS board, saying, Michael, you've got a D in your AS chemistry. Did you want to retake any of your modules to try and boost your grade up? I said, no, it will probably go worse. This is a terrible plan. I was not good at those things, and they impacted those 2 years. Fortunately, not too much more going forward. But making a decision to follow Jesus isn't like choosing your A-level options. The decision to follow Jesus will change your entire life. At our home group on Tuesday, we were talking, a couple of us, about seeing our parents come to faith later in life. And it was amazing to hear about the change that we saw in them. We were talking about new depths of joy and love shining out to those around them. And new confidence that was found, even overcoming addictions and bad habits. When we follow Jesus, we start to become more and more like the person we were created to be. And we begin to discover more and more the purpose for which we were made. And the second way that choosing to follow Jesus isn't like choosing your own options is because with Jesus you never have to take a retake. You never have to be afraid of failing, because even when we do mess up, even when we fall over, there is endless forgiveness, there is endless love, and there is endless loss. And it's in those moments when it's Jesus who comes and picks us up, dusts us off, and helps us back onto the right path. This is the decision that Paul was urging his listeners to make, to believe and put their trust in Jesus Christ, the risen Son of God. And some people did. And no doubt together with Paul and Timothy and Silas, when they arrived, they probably started a church together. And some people didn't. And that's okay. Sometimes we will share our faith with people and they'll say, no, it's not for me. And that is okay. That is fine. And our job at that point is to pray. To pray for them that they will find out the truth. And maybe if another opportunity arises, to try and take that opportunity as well on the next around. So this week we're going to be loving Hewitt. We're going to be loving our neighbours and loving our community. And my hope and prayer is that through these acts of service, that we'll get a chance to talk to people about why it is that we do what we do, why it is that we believe what we believe. So if you are presented with one of those opportunities, don't be discouraged. Be daring and allow someone